After a good 2 weeks, welcome back to the series of How Minecraft Works. This video will go over creating procedural meshes based off of the data generated in the last video in the series. Before we start coding, let's understand how this works first. So in the last video, we substantiated that the block ID of 0 is an error block. Knowing this, depending on the block data around error blocks, we will create faces facing towards the error blocks, therefore creating a hull of the chunk, which is many times more performant than instantiating a bunch of cubes to represent the block data. So now without further ado, let's code the mesh generation of chunks in Minecraft. So first, in the scripts folder, create a new C# script called chunk mesh creator. Once done, open up Visual Studio. Now in the chunk mesh creator script, remove the mono behavior inheritance and remove the start and update method. Next up, add in this dictionary. The vector3 is used to store the direction in which we will check for error blocks, and the face data type is something we will make that will store arrays for the different faces of a cube. Next up, let's make the face data class, which will store the different face data for the cubes. For more information on mesh generation, there will be a link in the description that goes more in depth on the matter. When you are finished with the face data class, there will be a text doc in the description that contains all the variables that store the different face vertice offsets, indices, and UV order, which will be for another video. All you got to do is copy and paste this into your chunk mesh creator class, and you now have lines of code that have a history of sleepless nights and create an empty constructor. Now with that complete, we are now going to populate the cube faces dictionary with the face data we just pasted. So in order to do this, first initialize the cube faces dictionary in your constructor, and then loop over the check directions array that you pasted. In this loop, pull a yandere dev and do this. This large chunk of code populates the cube faces dictionary with face coordinates, mesh triangles, and UV vector order based on the direction it is looping over. With that complete, create a new function called createMeshFromData, which takes a 3D integer matrix for the arguments. Now in this function, create two lists, one that stores the vertices and one that stores the triangles for our mesh. After that, create a for loop that will iterate over each point in a 3D array. In order to get the specified dimension of each chunk, we can make the chunk size in the world generator a public static read-only variable. Now inside of this for loop, make a vector3 int variable that stores the block position the loops are going over, and then make another for loop that iterates over each check direction. Now in this for loop, create another vector3 int variable that is the block position variable plus the check direction being looped over. Now make a try-catch statement that will prevent any out-of-bounds exceptions from occurring. And in this try-catch statement, we will do an if statement that checks a specific point in the data being passed into the function whether or not it is 0, otherwise known as an error block. Also in this if statement, check if the block being looped over is an error block itself, so you don't create just a giant rectangle with hundreds of thousands of vertices. Now in this if statement, using the check direction currently being looped over, use it to get the face data instance from the cube faces dictionary. Now with the face data instance, add to the vertices and triangles lists. For the vertices, don't forget the offset using the coordinates from the 3D loop we made. Now with that complete, copy this section of code into the catch statement so the chunk is completely drawn. This will be changed in the future when generating whole grids of chunks. Now, for the last thing that needs to be done, we need to make this function return a mesh. To do this, at the top of the createMesh function, add in a new temporary mesh variable and initialize it as a new mesh object. Now at the very bottom of the function, set the vertices and triangles of the mesh variable to be the vertices and indices list we made in this function. And after that, simply return the mesh as the last line. Now the mesh generation is complete, for now. I say for now because we still have to apply a texture on the mesh using UVs, but that'll be for another video. Now back in the world generator class from the first video in the series, go to the part where the generation of some temporary chunk data finishes, and add in a line that creates a new game object with the mesh renderer and mesh filter preloaded onto it. Now get the mesh filter of the new temp chunk and set the mesh to be the create mesh from data in the chunk creator class. Use the temp data created in the last video as the data argument for the function. When that line is finished, go back into Unity, and if you hit play, you should see an untextured Minecraft chunk. Well, that is all for this video. We covered procedural mesh generation, and you got to use the code that took me a ridiculously long amount of time to figure out. So leave a like and subscribe. And with that said, I hope to see you all in the next video. Goodbye.